Hey, this is Brienne from MyNameIsBrienne.com. In medieval times, if you wanted to be a craftsman, it wasn't just as simple as hanging out your shingle. The decision to pursue a trade or a craft started young and lasted for many years. As Theodore Roosevelt once said, the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. And that's why today I'm excited to introduce you to best-selling author Jeff Goins. In this interview, Jeff shares the lessons he's learned about this time-worn path from apprentice to journeyman to master, and how this approach to craftsmanship applies to the modern world of work, entrepreneurship, and business.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for being with us today. As we're recording this, you are in the midst of kind of a whirlwind of activities around your book launch, which was around the recently released and I believe best-selling now Art of Work title. For those who may not be familiar with you and your work, or maybe they don't know the book, I'd love if you could just kick us off a little bit by telling us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to write this book.
Sure. So the book, The Art of Work, is really it's a book for anybody who feels stuck in life. They feel like they're meant to do something. You know, they know that there's important, meaningful work for them to do, but they're just not sure how to close the gap between where they are and where they want to be. And the book takes kind of an artful, approach to that process, which was initially based on my experience. But then, as I started writing the book, I realized how sort of one-dimensional that felt. And so I did a bunch of interviews with people, just found a lot of people are doing really interesting, meaningful work in the world, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And their stories really became the meat of the book. And I learned all these really kind of interesting things through that process. And one of the biggest things that we saw again and again as a theme throughout all of these different stories, including my own, is that your calling, your purpose, the work that you're meant to do, tends to surprise you. That this journey of getting to where you're meant to go in life. I think we think a lot of times that it's this linear path. And in The Art of Work, I describe a much more roundabout way of getting to your life's purpose that I think seems truer to most of our lives, most of the way we live our lives, as opposed to this, A plus B equals C formula that we sometimes get in the self-help section of the bookstore.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, as you and I were just talking about before I hit record, the people that are going to be watching this, all of you who are tuning in, are definitely that kind of person where they had this idea, this vision, they had a sense of a purpose and a calling. And in a lot of cases, they feel like either they've stumbled into this world of entrepreneurship or they've just been thrown in kind of head first, and it feels a little bit like sink or swim. And one of the metaphors that you use to talk about that process in the book is this notion of the craftsman and this journey from apprentice to journeyman to master. And that's really interesting to me on a couple levels. Number one, because I'm always geeking out about education stuff, and this idea that we go from apprentice to journeyman to master is so true. But also just because that's what entrepreneurship often feels like, is you're just thrown into this, and sometimes it feels like we don't have an apprenticeship, and we are having a hard time finding who should be our mentors and who should we be looking for that. So I would love if you could just dive into that a little bit with us.
Yeah, one of the ideas in the book, one of the terms I use is called the Accidental Apprenticeship. And it's this idea that all of your life is conspiring to educate you and prepare you for the thing to come. Everything in your life is preparing you for the next thing to come. If you're intentional, if you can use all of these accidents in an intentional way. So it's sort of, the word accidental is sort of tongue in cheek in the sense that it's an accident in that you don't have to go and get a formal education. Typically, this is not the way that you're going to find your life's purpose. You may find it in that context, but it tends to happen seemingly informally. And the people who are intentional about that, the people whose stories I tell in the book, they used whatever was in front of them, whatever relationships, whatever resources they had, and made the most of them. And the people that don't do that are the people that, keep getting more letters added onto the end of their name. And there's nothing wrong with education. I love education. But the best education that you can get, that I talk about in the book, is the education of your life, the life that you're living. And I think a great example of that is the story of Steve Jobs. He went to Reed College, couldn't afford to stay there, dropped out, ended up sleeping in friends' dorm rooms and auditing a few classes. And this was sort of the beginning of his accidental apprenticeship. And then, after that, he went and worked at Atari, became friends with Steve Wozniak, went to India for a while. All of these seemingly random things were actually preparing him. Each step of the way was giving him an essential skill that he would use later on in life, when he kind of realized his calling. From the calligraphy classes that he audited at Reed that he said later influenced the beautiful typography on the first Macintosh, to really talking, Woz into doing all of the engineering work, that he needed done at Atari, and he basically got that job through Wozniak, and because of him, to this stint that he had in India that sort of gave him this Zen-like outlook on the world that certainly in their products. So what looks like on the outside an accident, a bunch of random things, he was being very intentional, not exactly knowing what he was going to do. He was intentionally grabbing a hold of each opportunity and learning. And I think that's what an accidental apprenticeship is. It's taking all of these random things in your life right now, and it's intentionally using them to create a portfolio of meaningful work. Even if you aren't quite sure exactly what that looks like, you can be intentional with the life that you've been given now, which I think is much better news than you need to be picked. You need, some teacher or master to come pick you and say, you're going to be my apprentice, or having to, shell out hundreds of thousands of dollars to get, a first-class education. Not everybody has the resources to do that, but everybody has the resource of their life and the relationships around them. And I think that, the lesson that I learned in telling all these people's stories, and certainly in my own life, is that help is always available to those who have eyes to, recognize it when it comes. That's
such a good point, that, the opportunities are there, and it's about being aware and just being open to realizing what's going on around you. And I can look at my own life and see that pattern emerge as well. I mean, I worked for 5 years in a post-secondary education institution, and I saw how it actually was a technical college. So, we had apprenticeship programs, and it was formal apprenticeships. Cool. And from my experience, that was where I fell in love with, this idea of, doing as the way to be learning, rather than, just having books and all of this tell you what to do. Because there's a mastery that comes when you actually do the work. And I think you'd agree with that. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's the only way to master a skill is to do it. And one of the things about writing the book was I kind of geeked out on the history of apprenticeship. And, I really, when I began to understand what apprenticeship looked like, it actually helped me understand my journey a little bit better. So I quit my job 2 years ago, and I thought I had arrived. And so a year and a half into that journey, when I'm full of angst and frustration and confusion, I'm going, what's going on here? And I started reading about the journeyman. The journeyman, typically you would apprentice for 7 years, kind of in the Middle Ages, beginning of the Renaissance, and you would do that as a student under a teacher in their workshop, usually helping them create their work, and they put their name on it, and you didn't get any credit, but you got to learn. You didn't get paid. Sometimes you got fed and room and board usually. And then at the end of that 7-year apprenticeship, typically you'd go out for 2 to 3 years. You would journey around. You'd go to different towns or wherever, and you try to practice your craft. But you were basically having to prove yourself. And then at the right time, if when you created a masterwork and submitted it to the local guild, if they accepted you, if you were good enough, you became a master, and then you could take on apprentices. And plenty of people never got to that level. But being a journeyman means you have to prove yourself. And so when I quit my job and, I'm full of all of this angst, and I thought, man, I thought I arrived, and here I am full of frustration. I still don't feel good enough. I still feel insecure about all these things. I realized I'm not a master yet. I'm journeying through the process. I'm having to prove myself, and that process is full of a little bit of angst. It helped me understand that a little bit more. And what's also fun about that is, as you mentioned, is the apprenticeship system in many ways was replaced by the university system. And there were plenty of good things that came, about the Age of Enlightenment. A lot of great things came about as a result of the university system. One of the things that we lost is, sort of this general notion that the way that you master a skill is by doing it, not by just learning about it. But there are still some places in the world where apprenticeship is practiced. And I think there are really good things about that. If you have an accidental apprentice, is to become an active participant in the education of your life, of gathering the skills that you need to do the work that you're meant to do, which does not end when you get a degree. I got a degree. It's great. I'm proud of that piece of paper. But in many ways, that was just the beginning of the education for me. And spending 7 years working at a nonprofit as a marketing director, where I got to do stuff every day and learn how to get ideas to spread and lead teams and write and communicate, that day in, day out practice prepared me much more for what I do now than, sitting in an English class.
Yeah, absolutely. And this metaphor of, the journeyman, especially that journeyman piece, I think, as you were talking, I was thinking, that's going to resonate so much with the people who are tuning in because, they've done the apprenticeship. Maybe they were trying to build their business or formulate their ideas, or they've been trying to write this book. They had a day job while they were doing it, and they finally took that leap. And like you, they're kind of like, okay, I took the leap. I've arrived. Like I'm a business owner. I'm, whatever. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. And yet there's still that journeyman experience that we have to go through before we can really claim to be a master. And this is one of the things that I see often is, that there's a lot of people who look at this world of online business, for example, and they see, these fantastic people who are making bucket loads of money by teaching what they know. And I think what we forget is that there's a process between apprenticing and mastering where we really have to develop our own skills in order to be able to then, teach those skills to the next generation, if you will.
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting about mastery is a master did not call himself a master. Other masters called a journeyman a master. And that's how you became a master, is you had to be sort of accepted by your peers. And I'm all for not waiting for somebody to come and like give you a special badge and say, I choose you. But on the flip side, just because you have a website and start, dishing out advice and selling things on the internet doesn't mean that people should listen to or even pay you necessarily. There's something about you proving yourself amongst your peers and people pointing to you and saying, yeah, like this person has what it takes. They've got good stuff. It seems to me that if you're doing good work, your reputation will often precede you. And so what it means to be a master is not that you did a bunch of awesome stuff and now you tell people how awesome you are. It's that you did a bunch of awesome stuff and people can't help but talk about you. Yeah. And I think it's easy to toot your own horn these days with a blog and a Twitter account and all kinds of easy ways to make you look sometimes more legit than you are. And I think the temptation is to just short circuit that journeyman process instead of doing. I mean, think about it. They journeyed from city to city, practicing their craft, proving themselves before they could sit in a shop and have people come and say, I want to learn from you. And I think that's a missing piece because it's easy to short circuit these days, but a necessary one if you really want to do good work and have a long lasting career, because you can only pretend to be a master for so long before people realize you actually don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, as you were talking about journeying from town to town, I had this vision in my head of, I know part of your early path was you did guest posting all over the place.
Yeah,
I mean, that's literally the online version of going from town to town and working with other masters and, getting feedback on your submissions. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, until you get to a point where you now are recognized by others as being a master in your field and in this conversation.
Yeah. I remember one time when I was, I'd made friends with a guy named Michael Hyatt, huge blogger, well-known, online personality. And I'd started my blog And this was really like my 8th blog. I had all these other crappy blogs, but this one I was finally getting serious about. And we'd become friends, 6 months before that. And I started publishing every day on my blog and starting to guest post. And I was getting better every day. And then I remember at the end of one week, I was looking at my phone, and for like the 5th day in a row, he had tweeted a link to my blog. I mean, it was just post after post after post. And I sent him a message. I said, hey, you don't have to keep doing this. Like, I was sort of like overwhelmed with the attention that I was getting from his hundreds of thousands of readers at the time. And I said, hey, you don't have to keep doing this. This is really nice, but it's not necessary. Thanks. I was like, okay, I get it. Like, you're being nice. And he just replied to me and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm sharing your stuff not because I'm trying to be nice, but because it's good. Mm. And that was sort of eye-opening for me to realize, like, I thought he was just being nice. I thought he was just being generous, and he is a nice guy. And he is a very generous guy. But that I think there's a surprising thing that happens if you're doing that. If you're going from town to town, if you're rubbing up against other people who are doing it, learning from them, getting feedback, which means people telling you what you're doing wrong. Like that humbling process of trying and struggling. And then, you kind of look up and you go, oh, like I've got some of this figured out. And a lot of times you're so close to the work that you don't realize it. And you need somebody else, as I mentioned, to say, hey, look what you've done. It's good. It's much better than, maybe you think it is. Because when you've got your head down and your nose to the grindstone, it feels like it did 5 years ago when you were a total amateur just starting out. But if you've been doing it day in, day out, hours every day, you are slowly mastering this skill that people are starting to take notice of. And that's a pretty cool thing, to see. But because it happens so iteratively, we tend to not take notice of it, which again is another reason why when we go on this journey to finding our life's work and proving ourselves to the world, living our dreams, it has to happen in community. It's not a solitary effort. And part of that community are these mentors, these other, masters or teachers, people who can speak into your life and help you certainly grow, but also acknowledge the growth that is and has happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a great sentiment and a good reminder that, I mean, even when you get to the point of being a master, your journey's not done. Right. You are always going to be pursuing the craft. And in some cases, it's the craft itself that compels you to keep, growing and evolving and honing that craft. So the last question that I'd like to ask you and leave you with is, when you look at your path and, what's coming up for you, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about how you are making sure that your excellence, your craftsmanship, your mastery is going to continue to grow even beyond this book and everything that's coming up around it.
Yeah, I actually don't. I mean, a lot of people think that mastery is the final outcome. I don't think it is. I think that there is a stage after mastery, which I call legacy. And, there's this idea, I think, that people talk about that, you just need to, you need to die without regrets. Like the whole point of your life is to die with no regrets and to be completely ready to die. I think that's impractical. I mean, what I have read of, people who have done way more than, I could even aspire to do, they still die with regret or with something unfinished. I'm not a fan of, living a bad life and then, having a bunch of regrets on your deathbed. What I do think we need to acknowledge is that the work will never be complete. The craft will always demand more of you. When I was writing, I read a story about Ernest Hemingway months before he shot himself. He's having a conversation with his editor and basically felt like all of this. He goes, "What do you do, Hotch?" He was talking to his editor, A.E. Hotchner. "What do you do when all of the stories that you thought you would write one day, you realize you're never going to be able to write?" I mean, he was depressed, and there was a lot of stuff going on in his life, but there was this sense of everything I've done up to this point, winning the Pulitzer, winning the Nobel Prize, it was not good enough. And if you're an artist, like me, if you're a perfectionist and the work never feels good enough, you kind of get that. Like I read that and I got that. I was like, I totally get that. One of the ways in which I think we guard against that is to not make mastery, the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is legacy. It's multiplication. It's me dying on my deathbed and going, this isn't done, and this isn't done, and this isn't done. But I have people that I've invested in that will carry out the work after me. I think a great contrast to the Hemingway story, and I love Hemingway, but a great contrast to that, very different artist for sure, is Walt Disney. Also died early. Really was in the beginning stages of Disneyland, and they had just bought all this land in Florida and started the plans for Disney World. And there were so many things that he wanted to do that he never saw to completion. But he had invested in people. Early on in his career, he realized, I can keep getting better and better at my craft, or I can become a leader and invest in these people. And I think we need both, certainly. But I think that whether you're an artist or an entrepreneur, whether you're an athlete or a writer, I do think that the ultimate goal of doing meaningful work in the world is to leave a legacy. Jackie Robinson said, a life is not significant except for its impact on others. So when I think about the way that I'm measuring my mastery, when I'm measuring excellence, I always want to get better and better and better. I'm trying to create more and more margin, less busy work, more margin to create. I'm realizing that with a business being a creative, there's tension there. But I don't see my skill set as just one thing that I do. It's a whole portfolio of things that I do. My business and my writing and even marketing stuff, they all kind of complement each other really well. But at the end of the day, what I'm going to feel good about when I leave this world is that I have started something that others get to carry on in my absence. That makes me excited. I love when I invest in other people or other projects and I see them carried on without me. That means that I'm doing work that scales, that multiplies, and that ultimately, hopefully, is leaving an impact and a legacy in the world. So that's kind of how I'm measuring the work that I do. So in regards to what's next, I'm always looking for opportunities to invest in people and in projects that can be carried on without me.
That is just a fantastic answer to what I think was a little bit of a challenging question to end off on, but you nailed it.
Great question.
So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today and sharing what you're doing. For those who want to catch up with you after they watch this, what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, go to my blog, goinswriter.com, Goins writer.com. And to find out more about the book, including how to get some free bonuses, you can go to artofworkbook.com, and find out more about that there.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that we have links to all of that down below the video. So thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brianna. It's my pleasure.
All right.